All right, so we're going to be starting with something different. We're going to do a view arena, but not at the very start. We're going to start with the article that I just I came across this morning. I haven't looked at it yet, but it is an article on the fight. It's called the Fighting Chess Index. This was published this morning by Grandmaster David Smerdon from Australia. I believe he's currently living in Milan. Introduction. The Fighting Chess Index, FCI, is a composite weighted measure of the combativeness of top chess players. It combines data about the frequency, length, and color of drawn games from 2015 to 2020 to provide a single score for each individual that can be used to compare the degree of fighting chess among players. The article introduces the FCI and the basic methodology, provides current rankings, FAQs, and a technical note with the details for replication. All right. So based on this, I assume he put in quite a bit of work. This was not just done randomly. It sounds like he put in a lot of time and effort. I'm sure there are going to be people who will the people who do economics and math who will widely go in and probably try to say there's some problem with it. But at any rate, this seems pretty good so far. Okay. An early caveat. All indices are controversial to varying degrees. It's important to note that I have used standard and widely accepted methods to create the index with as few of my own subjective decisions in the input as possible. I have highlighted where I have these assumptions and why. I also reran the index under various different assumptions to see if the ranking significantly changed. On the contrary, the FCI is remarkably robust. Players who have very similar scores might swap their rankings depending on the assumptions, but someone ranked first will always come out as slightly more fighting than someone ranked 20th, no matter which version we use. So you guys are asking who is the author? It is David Smerdon. He is a grandmaster from Australia, currently living in Europe. I believe he is an economist, if I'm not mistaken. That's what he does. Second caveat. I did not create the index to target any particular players, many of whom are my friends and colleagues. Rather, I made it because there seemed to be strong demand among chess fans and even other grandmasters for something like this. I talk a little bit about why some players might have high or low FCI scores, as well as what can and can't be inferred from the index, but I'm sure further discussions will follow, after which the index can be tweaked and hopefully improved along what most chess fans believe is a truer representation of fightingness. The FCI is a score out of 100, where a higher score means the player is more fighting. I used data from the freely available Kaisa-based November 2020 version and included all games from 2015 to 2020 by players who had played at least 100 games and had an average rating of at least 2,400 in this period. Thus, the top 50 table below refers to the active players with the highest average rating, according to the database from their 2015 to 2020 games. Now, one thing that I find interesting about this, and I'm sure, of course, this was done to talk about the top level chess, but you know what I bet? I'm betting that if you look at this, since it says players whose ratings are 2,400 plus, I bet from 2,400 up to 2,600, you're going to see a much higher fightingness rate. The quote unquote decisive games will be a lot higher from 2,400 up to some point. I don't know if it's 2,600 or 2,650, but that would be an interesting addendum, assuming it's not addressed in this article. So I would be kind of curious if there is an additional part they could do to this. Anyway. Thus, the top 50 table below refers to the active players with the highest average rating according to this database from their 2015 to 2020 games. Okay, in general terms, the index is computed as follows. First, I cleaned the database as best I could to merge names for the same player and remove Simul, Chess 960, and Consultation games, etc. Second, I calculated the percentage of draws, short draws, and short draws with white, as well as the average length of the draws for each player. Okay, now this is very important, you guys, because a short draw and a short draw with white are very different things. I've said it many times, or I guess we can already see the start of the list, but I've said it many times, and I will say it again. I think that in chess, the pressure is always on the player with white pieces to play for a win. I'll scroll up just for a second, but it's on the white to play for a win. It's really important that white tries to put pressure. So if they weigh this correctly, I do think short draws with white should make you a lot less aggressive as a fighting player. Now there always are going to be certain situations where it makes sense, but this is a really important weighting if this is weighted slightly differently, because a short draw with black in the general scheme of things is considered good by any top player. Because it means then you get to play with white the next game, you get to put pressure on your opponent and so forth. All right. So, short draws is white as well as the average length of the draws for each player. I chose 30 moves as the threshold for a short draw, as being under 30 moves in accordance with the Sophia rules. Third, I ran a principal component analysis that, in simplistic terms, combines all of the metrics above, weighs them in such a way as to avoid double counting, e.g., it recognizes that someone with many short draws will also have low average draw length, and extracts one number to represent the hidden concept that these measures might explain, in this case, fighting chess. Finally, I adjusted the scores such that players who more often play players around their own strength, or such that players who more often play players around their own strengths, such as in more round robins, aren't punished for scoring more draws than similar players who play games with bigger rating differences, such as in large open tournaments. Oh, okay. So it's actually, I mean, it looks like there are a lot of little things that are done. Now, one thing that I would say again, and this is what makes chess very tricky across the board, is that in order to do something like this index, you need someone of a certain caliber in chess who's played at, to a certain degree, the highest level of chess. So the fact that David Smerdon is a grandmaster plays a huge role, because I do think if you're a little bit lower rated, it's very hard to put this together because you don't understand the differences between like a short draw with white, an open tournament versus a round robin and so forth. So that's what makes it very tricky, and it's great that David did this because David is a grandmaster. I believe he has played against some of the top players in the world. I think in the Olympiad maybe played Anand, or he's played some of the 2,700 plus player guys, so he has a pretty good understanding. All right, so let's see here. Let's go with the list. Okay, let's go. Oh, I just saw my name pop up. Okay, so number 1 with 80.1 is Mr. Vladimir Kramnik. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys, that is not surprising in the least. And I'll tell you why it's not surprising. I'm sure they explain it later on in the article, but Kramnik is a guy who, like, in the last year or two, has become a guy who just plays, he just plays to win or lose at all costs. And one thing that's really important to note about Kramnik is that he was the world champion. He obviously had a very successful career. So at some point, it doesn't, because Kramnik always loses. Well, I mean, sometimes. But the thing is, for Kramnik, he's near the end of his career. The financial incentives and the risk of not getting invitations doesn't apply to him in the same way. So it's much easier for him to take huge risks, is what I would say. So number 1 is Kramnik, 80.1. Number 2 is Lequang Lam, 79.3. Now, that's actually kind of odd. I wonder what that's based on, because the thing with Lequang Lam is he hasn't played a lot of online tournaments, and I can't recall him playing a lot of round robin tournaments featuring top players. So that's kind of surprising. In fact, you know what I'm going to say? When I look at these next two, I'm going to have to go back later and look at the weighting, because when I look at Lequang or then I look at David Navarra, it strikes me as very odd that these guys are number 2 and 3, because David Navarra is another player who's very high rated, but he has not played a lot of players around 2,700 plus. I think if you look at his games where he plays players who are 2,700 plus, I think his rate of victories and losses will go down significantly, whereas I know that he's played in a lot of league tournaments where he plays against a lot of 2,600, 2,650 level players. So I am a little bit skeptical of this looking at these first couple right off. Kramnik makes sense. The next two, I guess it depends on the weighting or the system that's used. Number 4, very impressive, is none other than Fabiano Caruana, 78.4. Again, not crazy surprising. Fabiano has a lot of decisive games in the last year or two, especially. He's become much more aggressive. Much more aggressive. Yeah, he explains it above, but okay, let me scroll up then, because for Navarra and Lequang, let me scroll up. It says, in this case, finally, I adjusted the scores such that players who more often play players around their own strength, such as in round robins, aren't punished. But see, I actually question this, because David Navarra, if I think about David Navarra, I don't think he's played in a single round robin tournament which has featured all 2,700 plus players, except maybe one tournament in Prague, but that doesn't have players who are in the top 10 in the same way. So that's why I'm actually kind of skeptical about this, because it does appear to me that someone like David Navarro, Lequang Lam, they're very strong players, but I do not think they've played in round robins, which are considerably harder in terms of having decisive games than open tournaments where you're going to have many more decisive games. So that's what I would say is I'm actually skeptical about this, because to me, this doesn't look right. As I scroll down the list, every other player here makes sense if this applies about not being punished. Like Fabiano, okay, Artemiev, he's played opens, but he's also played some very strong round robins. Elyanov, another player, okay, Elyanov has played some very serious tournaments as well. So even that's not that surprising to me. But I feel like these two, based on what they say above, I'm skeptical because Lukwang, Lam, and Navarra have not played anywhere near the same amount of top-level round-robin tournaments as the next 10 players on this list. In fact, actually, you see Elyanov 77, Naidish 76.9, Duda 76.8, Magnus 76.5, and then you see Anarkiev, another player where it would appear to me that based on these rankings, this is another player who's not played at the same level of events. So I'm actually a little bit skeptical. When I look at the top 10, I see 3 players here where my perception would be that in fact there is some kind of bias towards open events or towards league events. So it's like, I mean, it's like it just feels like when I look at these 3 players, Anarkiev, Lukwang, and Navarra, they obviously have a lot of decisive games. But you would also argue if they have a lot of decisive games, shouldn't they rank more highly? Because if you look at Kramnik, Fabiano, Artemiev, Elyanov, Naidish, Duda, Carlson. These are all guys who have, Naidish maybe hasn't been as high, but I think it's been as high as like 27-20. But everybody else has been like 27-50 at some point. Every single other player that I see in the top 10. So yeah, if there isn't a one-to-one comparison on the strength of the events and opponents, these comparisons become kind of pointless. Yeah, and the reason that I would say that too, though, is that like Navarra, for example, the way that he gains a lot of rating points is he plays these league tournaments and he crushes 2,600 players. So Lukwang, I am much less familiar with in terms of what events he's played, but it feels kind of skewed a little bit. It feels kind of skewed. Playing aggressive at their level, sure, but I mean, I'll give you an example. Look at this tournament in Romania, for example. Everybody, when they play Dayak or they play against Lupulescu, they're trying very hard to win the game. When they play each other, they'll try to get their advantage and play for a win if the opportunity presents itself, but you're not going to go crazy. You're not going to be like, I must beat this guy at all costs. So that's why it actually kind of does matter in general terms. So let's keep going. Okay, so Topalov is number 11, 75.2. Yay! I'm number 12 at 73.5. Contrary to what certain sites would have you believe, or what certain fans of certain sites would have you believe, I do not draw every game that I play in, and I am not last on this list. So take that, haters. Let's keep going. Number 13, Ivan Cheparinov, 71.4. Number 14, Maxime Vachilegrov, 71.4. Number 15, Vidit Gujarati, 71.3. Okay, pretty normal. I mean, you see a lot of top names, just top names everywhere. Dominguez, Grishuk, Andreikin, Yu Yang, Nepomniachtchi, Matlikov. I mean, Karyakin, Rapport, Wesley. Pretty solid. I mean, Anish is down in 30 at 65.9. Okay, that's kind of crazy. Anish is that much lower than Magnus, 65 versus 76. That's pretty insane. So Anish is here on 30, Sam Shanklin, Mamadou. Actually, Shaq. Shaq is kind of low, but this is where I'm gonna tell you guys again. As I look at this is where I call a little bit of where my alarm goes off, because Shakrar, for example, has played nothing but top tournaments, and he is not a dry player. He does not play for quick draws at all. And so, like, because Shaq has played in top tournaments, it feels like somehow he gets punished for playing, Magnus, Anish, Wesley, and everybody else. And then at the very top, you have people who basically get rewarded for not playing in these same tournaments. So that's why I don't know about the methodology. Obviously, I'm not an economist and I don't know the math behind it, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it feels a little bit strange. Okay. So we have Shanklin, Shaq, Boris Gelfand, Wang Hao, Ruslan, Ding Liren, Bakro, Bu, Leko, Malikov, Vidyugov, Almasi, Krivorushko, Valle-Pons, Fiddler, and the last 5. Number 46, Yakovenko. Anand is 47 at 57.9. Wow. Tomaszewski, Kasim Zhanov, and of course. I mean, we all knew this was going to happen. Like that. I'm pretty sure that's why my mods told me to read the article. How did I know? Somehow I knew this was going to happen. Okay, so number 47 is Vichy, 57.9. That's kind of surprising. And then number 50 is Radjabov at 51.2%, 6% lower actually than Rustam Kasimzhanov. So he's at 51.2, so 6.4% lower than the number 49. That's pretty insane. So wow, pretty nuts. Okay, so let's keep going. What else do we have? And then we have, okay, there's more to it. This is a list of the 50 active players with the highest average ratings in my sample 2015 to 2020, sorted from the most to least fighting. Nepo was on the list. The reason Alireza didn't make the list, you guys, is because I bet 5 years ago Alireza was lower than 2400 rated. So that's why Alireza is not on the list. Because it's 2015 2020. In 2015, Alireza was what, like 11 years old? Like, I mean, he wasn't even 2400. It wasn't even 2400, which, I mean, of course, that speaks to how much he's improved, but nonetheless, yeah. Okay, so Levy is not 2400 feet. I know you guys are trolling. Was he really that bad? Well, I mean, he was 11 years old, and his chart, he just goes way up. I'll pull up his chart later just to show you guys, but let's keep going. Okay. At the top of the list is a surprising name, Vladimir Kramnik, also known as the man who brought back the Berlin. But most experts agree that Kramnik at the end of his career was a very different animal to the Kramnik who became world champion 2 decades ago. In his final years on the scene, Kramnik seemed to break the shackles and play more for the love of the game, becoming overly and sometimes even comically optimistic about his chances in every game. He recorded a short draw in less than 4% of his games in this period, which overall his draws lasted an average of 52 moves. Ask most GMs and they'll have no problem agreeing that the other names at the top of the list belong to fighting players. The FCI scores are also pretty tight, and in fact, Vlad gets dethroned for the top spot by David Navarro and Laquan Lim in some of the index variations I tried. But if you're like me, you can't help but cast your eyes down at the bottom of the list. Coming 50th by some distance is Teimour Radjabov. In 2015 to 2020, he drew more than 60% of his games and played a short draw almost once in every 5 games. Note that this index doesn't account for his 2021 games, including the FTX Crypto Cup and the Superbet Classic. Nevertheless, the 22 candidates contender finishes 50th in almost every variation of the index that I tried. Okay, if you're like me, the most surprising name to see near the bottom of the list is Vishy Anand, so much so that I went back and manually checked all of his games. Since 2015, Anand played a short draw in roughly 1 out of every 7 games, with an overall draw rate of 55%. On the other hand, some of these short draws may be aimed at conserving energy in blitz and rapid events, i.e. events with multiple rounds per day. And these are more likely to be played with black. 42% of his short draws. See, again, drawing with black also, that makes a big difference. If you draw with black, that's much different than drawing with white for sure. And 42% of his short draws were with black. So that's plus EV in the game of chess because you want to put pressure on your opponent with white. Okay. Okay. But note that the argument about short draws being strategic is not inconsistent with the validity of the FCI. Making short draws to conserve energy and improve one's tournament position is a potential excuse for a poor score, but that score still represents what most chess fans would agree is a low degree of fighting chess in the games. Wait a second, let me reread that. Wait a second. Making short draws to conserve energy and improve one's tournament position is a potential excuse for a poor score, but that score still represents what most chess fans would agree is a low degree of fighting chess in the games. Okay, but I mean, if I'm not misunderstanding what he's saying here, he's basically saying, draws and conserving energy is an excuse and fans don't care about that. But I would argue that at the end of the day, a player has to do what is best for him. And it's about trying to put yourself in the best position to win the tournament. It's not about pleasing the fans. So I very strongly disagree with that. Still, overall, the Anand in 2015 to 2020 is a less ferocious tiger than in his days as world champion, although Kramnik's score shows that this isn't always the case. In a future post, I will discuss what happens if we extend the FCI to include games before 2015, as well as compare the scores of the various world champions throughout history. The next graph, which you'll need a big screen to read, lists the FCI scores for the top 100 players by rating over 2015 to 2020. Okay, let me see. Can I open this? Okay, yeah, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. But I'll show you guys what it says just to be clear. It says Burkesh is it says Kovalenko is number 1, Gawain Jones is number 2, Malkumian is number 3, Shugarov is number 4, Kramnik is number 5, McShane is number 6, Laquang is 7, Navarro is 8, Morozevich is 9, Fabian is 10, Bluebaum is 11. Bluebaum is 11 and so forth. Yeah, I know you guys can't see it because I can't enlarge it big enough so that you'll see it. But anyway, those are the names and yeah, that's what it is. So anyway, yeah. All right, so that's the graph. So let me go back. That's just the top 100. All right, let me readjust this. Just give me 1 second. You'll find the full list in the appendix at the bottom. Okay, highlighted in red are the top 10 players. who ranked from most to least fighting. They are Kramnik, Caruana, Carlson, Vachiy-Lagrave, So, Aronian, Loren, Giri, Mamedyarov, and Anand. Coming first by some distance is Igor Kovalenko with an FCI score of 88.7. The Ukrainian GM, who plays for Latvia, drew only 24% of his games in this period, but even more impressively, less than 10% of his draws were short, and almost never with white. Two Englishmen, Gawain Jones and Luke McShane, figure among the next 5 most fighting players, along with 2 Russians, Kramnik and former prodigy Sinan Shugarov, and the Armenian honorary Australian Hrant Malkumian. By the way, the FCI is mainly useful for comparing players, but if you want to try to interpret one of the individual's score, note that the average FCI score in the current index is 65.8. Anything above this is above average for the sample. The often maligned Anish Giri is above average by 0.1% and vice versa. This is because the FCI scores have been rescaled such that the most fighting player in the whole sample, i.e. active players with an average rating above 2400, has a score of 100, and the least fighting player has a score of 0. Okay. That of course begs the question, who are the two at the end of the scale? Coming in with the top score of 100.0 is a Russian IM called Ivan Aldukin. He is one of a handful of players with a short draw percentage of less than 1% and who never played a short draw with white in this period. Another is the well-known IM Greg Shahadi with an FCI of 94.8. One of the more recognizable names at the top is GM Robert Hess, 94.0. When he does draw a game, which happens only 12%, when he does draw a game, which happens only 12% of the time, it lasts more than 60 moves on average. Okay, this is kind of getting really random here. Another is GM Valentina Gunina, 93.6%, who also tops the FCI for female players. Her FCI score is consistent with her recent performance in the FIDE Women's Grand Prix in Gibraltar, in which she played 10 decisive games in a row before drawing her final round after 135 moves. Okay, you may be wondering, where is Alireza Farrugia? Across his 2015 to 2020 game, Across his 2015-2020 games, Alireza's average rating was only just too low to appear in the graph of the top 100 rated players. Otherwise, his impressive FCI of 82.4% would place him 4th out of the top 100 or clear first out of the top 50. Again, this fails to recognize the fact that, Alireza was 2,400 for probably 2015 and 2016. So again, this is not really being, this is sort of like not being honest in a way when you put this, saying that he would be the top, because his rating was 2,400. There's one big problem with this, which I'll explain after I get through this, because now this is actually starting to annoy me a little bit, which is at the other end, the anchor score of 0.0 goes to GM Igor Stahl. Since 2015, more than half of his games have been short draws, and in fact, about 1 in 4 of his games ends in a draw in 15 moves or less. There are some other famous names on this side of the scale that will not surprise many, such as GM's Alexander Halifman, 2.4%, and Bogdan Lalic, 3.7%, who are the only other two players where more than 50% of their games are short draws. But there are also plenty of GMs who make their livings from league matches or as paid professionals in so-called norm factories, such as the first Saturday tournaments in Budapest, the third Saturday tournaments in Serbia, and the Charlotte Chess Center's GM IM Norm events. Milan Drasko 5.3 and Tanguy Ringhua 14.5 are two examples of GMs who regularly take part as a title cannon fodder in these events. Sheesh. Okay, did he really say what I think he said? Did he literally just say that these are not legitimate tournaments? I mean, if I read that, he basically said the tournaments in Budapest, these tournaments in Serbia, and the tournaments held in Charlotte here in the United States are basically like rigged events. If I'm not mistaken, that's exactly what he's saying. Wow. Okay. Okay. I mean, okay. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, let's keep going. Okay. I doubt that these players will mind being told that they have a low FCI. The organizers of these events make their money from charging large fees to norm hunters and only really care that their GMs maintain a sufficiently high ELO so that the norm requirements are not too onerous. There are no incentives for the chess to be entertaining to the public. Likewise, most sponsors of league teams care much more about where the team finishes on the ladder than whether the games are exciting. The incentive structure of these markets doesn't make for fighting chess. In fact, quite the opposite. And that's arguably fine, seeing as these are typically not spectator events. Okay. When am I turning myself into a norm factory? Never, you guys. Come on, please give me a break. Okay, so let's keep going. So next steps. I expect there to be feedback and suggestions of varying degrees of usefulness. Few indexes are perfect first time around, and it's quite possible that some of these suggestions will convince me to make alterations to the methodology, which I'll detail in an update. I chose to take games since 2015 because I wanted the FCI to be current. But we chess fans are often interested in historical debates, such as who was the most fighting world champion. In a future article, I plan to extend this analysis by looking at historical players, gender and country differences, and so forth. In the future, I will probably also try to find some way to extend the index to active players of all ratings and make a searchable database online. But for now, this article just wanted to introduce the index, and I welcome comments and feedback, which you can leave below or send to me directly. If you're curious to know your own ranking and think you played more than 100 games in 2015 to 2020 with an average rating above 2400, feel free to contact me and I'll send you what I have. The easiest way to get in touch with me is through the contact form on my economics page. All right, let's see the FAQ. There's actually... Okay, I don't want to go through the FAQ completely, but what I would say is, so here's what I'm going to say about this, and I think it's very clear. There's one thing that I think that the elephant in the room, which is not being addressed here, and I'm going to say this, the elephant that is not addressed in the room is the fact that as players get better, the amount of decisive games goes down. So, for example, if you're 2700 and you play a 2700 player, you're going to probably draw like, I'm guessing that you're going to draw probably 7 out of 10 games. You're going to draw like 75-80% of the games. You'll have 1 or 2 games that are decisive. And so the problem with this whole thing is that all tournaments are not created equal. So, for example, what I would say is, when you look at Kramnik up here at the top, Kramnik probably did not play a single player that's under 2,700. I don't think it's factored in. I don't think it's factored in at all, because when I look at this list, maybe not factoring in at all, but I think there's something wrong with it. So when I look at David Navarra and Lequangliam and Inarkiev, you cannot tell me that they're playing against the same level of competition. If they're playing against a lower level of competition, of course they're going to be more decisive games no matter what. So I already read through it, but I'm basically saying that I think it's wrong, is what I'm saying. Because all the other names make sense, but all tournaments are not created equal, and it feels like you're comparing apples to oranges. So for the most part, I agree with I like the concept of this, but I don't think it does take that into account, because to me it doesn't seem correct. Navarra has played in very few invitational tournaments versus, say, let's just say even Elyanov. He hasn't had a great run in the last couple of years, but he was like 2740 or 2750 and playing a lot of top players. So isn't that basically saying 2400, 2600 is still alive and has decisive games? Yes, more or less that's what it's saying. More or less what I would say is that the fact is, as players get better and better, they lose less and less games because they're stronger. Like, players don't lose a lot of games when they get above 2700. If you look at just look at the FTX Crypto Cup, for example. Wesley lost he lost before he played Magnus in the final. He lost no games. You look at the previous event before I played Magnus in the final. I think I lost 2 games to Shaq. It's very, very low. Like, that's the thing. As players get better and better, the draw rate gets higher and higher. So it feels like, I don't know. It feels a little bit sketchy to me. I mean, some of these names like Kramnik make sense. Most of this does. But the fact that you see players who play in league tournaments and open tournaments showing up at the top of the list tells me that there's something within the criteria that needs to be tweaked. That's what I would say. Additionally, and I think this is the part, this is the part that I would add. The other thing that I would add as well is that there's one other big thing, which is that this also does not take into account when you play tournaments, which are where basically you playing every day for 5-6 hours is very, very brutal. Whether it's online, whether it's over the board, it's extremely brutal. So I think it's a good concept. I like the list, but I do think there are some errors in here. I think there are some things that have not been weighted accurately. Because, like, for example, as I look through this, Jan Nepomniachtchi, for example, when he plays in top level tournaments, he has a lot of decisive games. He really does. He plays very enterprising chess, and he's playing against the absolute best players in the world. So it's a little bit different. Nonetheless, I do like the concept of it. I think with some tweaking, it could be interesting. See how it works. Like, for example, if you only look at players over 2,700. But yeah, that's what I would say. There's an FAQ. Yeah, I don't want to go through the whole thing. It's going to get very technical. And I don't think most people are really want to read that. But anyway, we'll keep moving along. So what else do I have? I'm going to pull up this tweet by David Smerdon now, which was also there, which is introducing the Fighting Chess Index. So let me change it here. Here we go. Okay, so what do we have here? We have congratulations, Vita Chess, you're India number 1 here, LOL. Number 40, Ding Liren, 60.09. Number 29, 66.0. Liren, what? Okay, these are some funny replies. Lovely, but I can't believe Farrugia is on this list given the amount of games he has won and gone from 2,400 to 2,759. You see, but this also proves the point though. So like this also proves the point. This third tweet by Alireza Sabag, it proves the point that like Alireza, when he was 2,400 and playing, he was improving vastly, and he was getting better and better. Like, you know, what do you call it? Like his rating was going up parabolically. So because of that, you guys, what you see is that like Alireza was stronger than a lot of the players he's playing, so of course he's going to be winning and crushing them. So it of course would make sense. And I mean, ultimately the biggest takeaway I have from this list is that it shows that chess at the lower levels, you have more decisive games. As players become better and better and their knowledge becomes better and better, you have a lot less decisive games. And it really just shows the difference between players at the 2,700 plus level and players from like 24 to 2,700. That's what I would say. But especially 2,400 2,600, I would say. Anyway, so yeah, so let's keep going. Tigran Petrosian, okay. I just wonder what the instructions for Raja's second will be, but it must be a chill out job when he plays with white. It must be a chill job when he plays with white. Okay. Yeah, no, this is good stuff. This is some good stuff. But, you know, I would say, oh man, okay. Yeah. Okay, you guys. Anyway, yeah, it's a good article, but I will say again, you know, and this comes back to playing, playing on, you know, even playing online, for example. Like, everybody thinks that tournaments are like super, you know, it's very easy, you just make moves. But again, as I've said before, the mental stress when you play rapid chess, especially, of like playing a game that goes 1 hour and you have to avoid mistakes, whether it's in the middle game or whether it's at the end and you're down to like, you know, you're down to 3 minutes. There's a lot of stress. One blunder can be enough to lose the game. So in many cases, people do get tired. You get very, very tired, when you play so many games every single day, day after day. So that's what I would say in general about this, is that I like the list, but to me, the only thing it really shows is that there are a lot less decisive games because the players are just worse at the lower, you know, as they're like 2,400, 2,500, 2,600. That's really all that it shows to me. So yeah, that's the thing that I would say specifically. But it's a good article, good idea. There's more after the FAQ. Oh, I mean, I'm sure there's much more to it, obviously, but I don't want to get into it too deeply at this point in time. We already have spent like 1 hour on this article, so yeah, I just don't want to get too deep. All right, you guys. So yeah, so I'm gonna move along, and then we're gonna do a view arena. We're just gonna turn the music back on. So yeah. It's a top 100 list. It's interesting, yeah, for sure. But again, basically what it says, you know, and again, people will hate me for being blunt. Basically, it just says 2,400s and 2,500s and 2,600s even are not as good as 2,700 players. That's all it really says. That's all it says. I mean, honestly, that's all it says.